For this spoiler discussion on Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, I'm joined by Ghostbusters superfan Paul Gannon, who has appeared on my channel before, as we previously discussed Ghostbusters Afterlife back in 2021. He is best known for his podcast Cheap Show, and for his appearance on the YouTube channel Digitizer.
Have a sniff of that.
I think this is alright.
Oh, God.
So, is it?
Paul and I explore the movie in detail, along with ideas for the sequels and the overall state of the franchise. So, Paul...
Hello.
So, the last, number of months, Sony have been putting out a lot of teaser trailers for Ghostbusters, or theatrical trailers. A bit too many, I thought, and sort of revealing a bit too much about the movie. I know we had discussed before that Sony aren't particularly great at making trailers, whoever they hire to do them. But they didn't really get me super excited. The first one they put out had Cruel Summer. I thought I was watching Karate Kid for a minute.
Yeah.
I didn't really get much hype for this movie, and then when the reviews were published very late before the film was shown, it did leave me a bit a bit concerned, and I went into the movie and kind of agreed with most of the critics, but I did have some fun. So Paul, what did you think of Frozen Empire?
It was fine. See you next week, everyone. So I'm basically on the same page as you. I'm sure the finer details will differ, but for me, because famously when we last spoke about Ghostbusters, we talked about Afterlife, I told you how much that film rubbed me up the wrong way, and how much I didn't like it, and the comments below, were quite rightly, not quite rightly, because everyone's entitled to their opinion, but, they were like, oh, cheer up, blah, 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 it's just a film, this, that, and the other, which is fine, but the years have not been kind to that film, and my opinion is not improved. On the face of it, what I will say about Ghostbusters Frozen Empire is that effectively, it's got the same problems as Afterlife, but for some reason, I enjoyed this one considerably more. I agree with you. It's a rotten mess at times. There's too much going on, and they're spinning too many plates, and I don't think a lot of it is served particularly well, and characters go missing conveniently when they need to. But the vibe of it, I really liked. It felt more tonally closer to the original film.
Yes,
as best as it can. And it's weird because, as I say, I didn't like Afterlife. The reviews for Afterlife, I don't really particularly rate Rotten Tomatoes as a barometer of critical opinion, but they were reasonably favourable, about the same kind of grade as Answer the Call. It was like 64, 65, something like that, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Higher audience review. So when I started seeing the reviews for this coming out, I was actually quite surprised. Because I thought, just on the face of it, this film has to be better than Afterlife, right? But the reviews seem to be taking up all the same issues I had with Afterlife, but applying them more severely to this film than the last. And I just wonder if it's because Afterlife was such an effort to turn the franchise into an Amblin Spielbergian film than it was being a proper legacy film to the original 84 classic. It just felt like whatever those problems were seemingly rubbed people up the wrong way more in this one, even though I would say this one does that kind of thing, but more successfully. It's still awkward to see the library ghosts pop up for no reason, just because they're in the library. But it wasn't... I don't know, it's strange. I'm really kind of torn on this one. I'm happy to watch Frozen Empire again and again and again when it's on TV, or if I get the Blu-ray, or I just want to chill out. It feels like more of a film I can just lose my time into than Afterlife. But again, this one has just been taking more of the punches, I think, and I find that strange.
I think because the problems with Frozen Empire are kind of more obvious, I suppose. I mean, you could pick it apart more, due down to the fact that it does have too many characters and the plot lines all over the place, but they do sort of tie up at the end. And and I sort of say in my review, it's kind of a bit like a drunk juggling the film who gets sober by the end. Afterlife had a very straightforward kind of narrative, but it was just playing on nostalgia to a great effect, and we felt what we saw was a kind of repetition and the very much the copy paste ending of the original 84 film with Zool and the Pterodox again. Yeah, I remember that was one of your biggest beefs, was that it didn't do anything new.
That's it. I mean, it's not that it just didn't do anything new with the franchise. As a genre film, there was a checklist of tropes and cliches that it happily ticked off. There was the big city family moving to the small town, fish out of water stuff. There was the the elements of Phoebe being like, the savior child, hero's journey thing. You've got all those kind of very cliched things that you see in films like Lost Boys, like you see in Goosebumps, like you saw in The Gate, all those kind of films. And then the back half is just Ghostbusters, the 84 film, but told quicker, without any sense of threat, and with characters we haven't quite gotten to enjoy yet. It's tricky.
Yeah.
I mean, Frozen Empire, structurally speaking, is closer to the 84 film, often to its detriment. And I think that's going to be the problem, full stop, with this franchise now, is that they have to get over the 1984 film if it's going to survive. And I think this is the halfway house between the outright safe pandering to fans of the first film. This one's trying to be a bit more fun, play within the film. People have been saying it's like a real Ghostbusters episode, and I would agree it's got elements of that.
In the production notes of this, they said that the real Ghostbusters cartoon was an inspiration for the film. I can see some elements, like you've got I remember an episode, I think it wasn't an episode of the cartoon where the containment unit was kind of at full capacity.
I think what they're saying is the real Ghostbusters cartoon was like a lived-in version of the movie. The idea was it was more like a workplace comedy for kids that they happened to battle the supernatural. It wasn't like Mask or He-Man, where there was kind of a good villain kind of thing going on. It did feel like that. So that's why the kind of scenes in the firehouse of Slimer, or them just getting on their daily day within the building, I think that's what they were getting at. Because you've got to remember, there's been 5 Ghostbusters films, and 4 of them have been origin stories, basically, where they followed the same setting up the team, featuring the bad guy. The bad guy reveals to itself before the 3rd act. It's all closed off quite nicely. This one, it was nice to see them in action at the beginning, and the film just gets on with it.
Yes.
It doesn't start with them opening the firehouse again, starting from scratch, getting used to the equipment, being on their first call-out. It's nice to know that, for once, it's like in media res, you know what I mean? It's almost like it's just straight in there. And that helps, because I think that is what they were going for. They were finally, I would say, trying to move it all on into its own little world. And it's fascinating as well, because there are so many elements of this film which take abandoned ideas and concepts from Ghostbusters 1 to the original Hellbound script and stuff that they just deleted scenes in general.
Because I had highlighted that, you see Trevor trying to capture Slimer, which is basically Lewis Tully trying to capture Slimer in Ghostbusters 2, which was ultimately deleted. You mentioned to me about some of the ideas that was in the kind of unproduced sort of Ghostbusters 3 script from the 90s. So what did you see sort of that was carried over into this film?
Well, it was more that, so originally that Ghostbusters 3 script, and again, it's hard to judge it properly because it was the first or second draft, so, we all know Dan Aykroyd's first draft of Ghostbusters was completely mad, batshit stuff. And the 3rd script was similar to that.
It was the 3rd script, sorry, completely written by Dan Aykroyd, or did Harold Ramis contribute?
Yes. Okay. I don't believe Ramis contributed to this. I think this was Dan Aykroyd's first pass at it. So it's unfair to judge what it could have been as the finished product, because famously Ghostbusters 2 was quite different than what was originally planned for that film. Due to time and everything of how long it took to make that film, is a bit of a quick turnaround. A lot of things got sacrificed. With Hellbound, it starts in action. It starts with a ghost being, trapped by a new team with a different Ecto-1. And then when they go back home, there's a big shed full of all different types of Ecto-1s. There's different groups in different parts of New York in that area who have all got their own little franchises. So there's a load of characters right off the bat there. And then the old guard are slowly brought in. Ray's the expert who works upstairs. Winston's the money man. Egon's helping with the science. Egon, I mean, if he'd been alive today, blah, 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 would have been probably Acaster's role. If you can imagine that.
Yeah, for sure.
Bill Murray only turns up briefly in it at the end. I've talked about this before, but in the film, in the script, in Ghostbusters 3, he turns up briefly as God, because why not?
So he's kind of implied that Bill Murray gets killed off and he comes back as a spirit in the 3rd one.
It's interesting because in the script they talk about the sad loss of Peter. They don't explain what happened to him or anything like that. They just notice his passing. And at the end they meet God, and God's first thought was, I'll just appear as someone you know. And so he appears as Peter Venkman playing golf.
Oh, right, okay.
And that's how they would have gotten him in.
That would have been weird, but also kind of funny, you know what I mean? Just for Bill, just to take the piss, as it were.
But then you've got the villain, which is interesting because it's a very new, real Ghostbusters kind of villain, where effectively the villain in that was like a yuppie Wall Street trader in hell who was trying to basically bleed hell into America. So you had the new Ghostbusters in New York, protecting New York from things coming out of the hell, and you had the old Ghostbusters in hell, traveling through the underworld, trying to reach this bad guy and save the day. But way too many characters, not particularly very funny. It kind of just feels like a fever dream. It feels like it's definitely 3 or 4 passes away from being a real proper script. You come away from it going, thank God that was never made. But what a fascinating insight into what Aykroyd had next.
I suppose Aykroyd's kind of ideas and Harold Ramis's ideas were funneled into the video game, right?
Yeah, I mean, officially you can say that's...
Because that connects Ghostbusters 1 and 2, but also in Frozen Empire we are now seeing Walter Peck as the mayor, which was kind of what happened in the video game, right?
In the video game, he is paid to basically be a handler for the Ghostbusters. So it's his job to keep them in line and make sure they don't do too much property damage, basically. It was weird to see him in the film this way as a mayor, because to some extent I get it, but at the same time, character speaking, I don't think it quite works. He isn't in there to do anything other than what he did in the first film, which is to be a prick and to take all the Ghostbusters toys away, leading to the apocalypse.
As we were kind of exploring earlier with there's too many characters and kind of too many ideas kind of funneled into it. And in terms of like the tonally matching the 84 film, which I think it does kind of to a pretty good extent. I think the way it moves along, its pace, is actually very similar to the 1984 film, but because that film was only dealing with a very kind of straightforward narrative, the pacing is perfect for it. But with this, they've thrown in too much for it to juggle, because you've got the legacy characters, you've got the afterlife characters, and you've got the new set of characters. And weirdly, the afterlife characters end up being mostly redundant outside of Phoebe.
I said it before, but like the character Lucky, I feel sorry for the actress, because it feels like they gave her a nothing role in Afterlife, but felt compelled to keep her around for this and not give her too much to do either there.
She doesn't need to be in it, nor does Podcast, whose podcast was good. I liked it. I liked him in Afterlife. He had something to do.
Yes, I like the podcast. I mean, of all the complaints I had, the numerous complaints I had about Afterlife, one of the things I didn't complain about was Podcast and Phoebe's relationship. That was the endearing thing about it. There was an Egon Ray kind of dynamic to their personalities. But yeah, that's not really dealt with or used or exploited or built upon here.
No, and what we see with Phoebe, which is, I suppose, the biggest spoiler of the movie, is that she makes friends with a ghost called Melody, who doesn't really kind of imply... I think it might have implied when she did die. I can't remember now. The outfit she was wearing didn't really... It must have felt like the last 20, 30 years, maybe.
Yeah, 90s tops, maybe, something like that.
Yeah, something like that. And they sort of... What the film implies that Phoebe is possibly gay, and then she sort of turns herself into a ghost for a short period of time with this new technology where they can take you out of the old living body and put you as a ghost. It didn't really make a huge amount of sense, but they sort of don't really go anywhere with this relationship, because obviously it's clear they don't want to upset other countries around the world because she could be gay, which is, oh my God, But I always kind of thought with Afterlife that there was a connection with Phoebe and Podcast. That was their thing. Now they're sort of twisting it around, and in the film, Melody doesn't come across that she is gay. She's just like, I know what she's up to. All she's trying to do is get to the containment unit for it to create this passageway to the afterlife, so she can essentially, disappear, go to find her parents or whatever. It could have worked, like the other multiple storylines, but it's never really gets paid off. For an emotional connection, you know what I mean? It felt a bit like because we're missing quite a lot of footage. I think this film has been butchered to death. I think that's the problem.
Definitely. The one, if I have a complaint technically about the film, is that I thought the editing in places was incredibly sloppy and almost to the point where like amateurish. Which is, I'm not an editor, I can't speak for that craft. But one example I can think of instantly, because it struck me, was there's a scene where, what's the name of the actor who plays the firebender?
Camille Nanjiani.
Thank you, yeah, I'm awful with names. Where he, finds his power when the proton pack gets possessed by that little ghost and nearly kills some characters, and he uses firebending to move the proton pack away from Paul Rudd. It took me at least a minute after that scene happened to figure out the logistics of what was going on there, because the way it was shot was so tightly framed and the way everything kicked off that I felt like I'd missed a scene or two or missed a frame or two where everyone was in the room. And it was really confusing and cluttered. It just felt like there was get to the beat, quick, move on to the next one.
Do you think it's a slight detriment to the movie that it was shot at Pinewood Studios and they only basically captured B-roll from New York? Because what you end up with is a movie. I know in the original one they had shot a lot of stuff on the streets of New York, and then they shoot stuff at Columbia Pictures Studios for the interior bits. But so they're still the same process, and it's still shot from a opposite ends of the country. But I get a sense that with this one, it's very much set bound for a lot of it, and it sort of feels like a very small movie. It feels like it's very. The original one, you had this kind of great scope of New York, and Ghostbusters is still one of the best movies at capturing the energy and spirit of New York and the look of it. Obviously, New York's changed a lot since 1984, but it's what you see in the movie is a very much like a set-bound movie. And by come the finale, when the freezing monster from the orb kind of unleashes itself and rains terror, you end up with a very kind of small-scale battle that just takes place in a firehouse.
Sadly, because I have friends all over Ghostbusters world who both involved the production and not, I kind of knew a lot of what was coming and all the secrets, all the set pieces before I saw the film, so I kind of knew the finale was in the firehouse. I was more... Okay, so I'm just going to backtrack to a thought I had earlier, where people complain about the third act of this film, and I think there are problems there, but they're the same problems Ghostbusters 2, Answer the Call, Afterlife had.
Oh, yeah.
Where... it's kind of like the finale feels like a formality. It feels like it's the thing they do at the end where they all team up and shoot and cross the streams and blow something up, all right? Okay?
All ghosts come out of the buildings and fly around the city, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, they've got to move away from those visuals, right? Because it is just crazy now. But the thing about that is that Zool itself and the plot with Gozer and the Keymaster and the Gatekeeper is kind of redundant in that first film, because you spend at least an hour getting to know those characters, getting to know that world and getting to enjoy them and being with them. So when it all kicks off, when the Gatekeeper and Keymaster meet, and the big finale happens at the top of that skyscraper, it could have been anything really at that point, because it's brought in quite late. The kind of villain's brought in kind of late at that point.
And that's the same with Frozen Empire, isn't it?
Yeah, but you're invested in those characters because everything that's led up to that scene is about character work. It's about building the world, and it's about that villain could have been anything really, but Dan Aykroyd's smart enough to go, well, all right, so the villain is just this thing that will appear in the third act, but I'm going to show you things with it that keep in tone with the characters and the world you've understood. So that's why the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man works, because all the character and world building has led to that being a legitimate way to end that film.
Yeah,
I don't think the same thing can apply to any of the Ghostbusters films that comes after, apart from maybe Answer the Call, where you had a human villain effectively in that, orchestrating things all the way through it, and at least being a master of, some kind of devious plan.
Yes, because he set up quite early on early on, but he set up quite to sort of set him up as the villain, right? Where Ghostbusters 2, though, however, Dan Aykroyd does make I suppose, tries to improve upon the aspect of the villain, but introducing him very early on to set him up. And because, how it's written, he needs someone to help him because he's trapped in the painting. So you need that sort of early build-up to sort of, get to the end. But so with this one, I suppose they kind of... The villain itself doesn't really make an appearance to very late on, but he does have a sense of he does have a presence, which is the orb. But again, the bad guy is still kind of that freak of the week kind of monster we saw in things like X-Files or Smallville or the real Ghostbusters cartoon, right? It's kind of irrelevant, and it's a good design. I don't have an issue with the design of the beast, but it's it's creatively told when they show you, his history, which is kind of animated by brickwork, how it's like, all morphs around.
Which is interesting.
So that was kind of, a nice little touch, but again, it didn't really have much consequences. But it would have had more of an impact if we'd actually kind of cared about this whole kind of narrative. But because it's been gutted and chipped away, it's very difficult to get fully invested. And the only as I sort of state in my review, was that the Captain Nadim is kind of probably the most interesting character, just down to the fact that he made me laugh. I think
he is the funniest guy in the film.
Yeah, and he delivers kind of, I suppose, often generic dialogue in a very funny way to make it work. And that's what, despite all these kind of problems surrounding the movie, that was really the thing that got me through it was the comedy. It's something I can watch a kind of a bit of a clunky bad movie, but if it's making me laugh, I'm like, yeah, I'll give that a pass.
Yeah, it's almost as if it makes it go down easier. But,
it does.
I mean, the thing is as well, like thematically, your villain should, in some respect, I think, reflect a character's arc. So with Zool and the Gozer and the Keymaster, what you're doing there is you're kind of allowing this weird fictional doom-laden thing to go up against three schlubs. Like I say in my book, I coined this term, and maybe I heard it elsewhere and I'm stealing it. But in the 80s, you had the snobs versus the slobs. Yes. And this was more like the slobs versus the gods. It was kind of like if you took Animal House and the dean was actually a demon from another dimension, right?
Yeah.
So, and then Ghostbusters 2's thematic kind of thing is about, goodwill to all men, negativity in New York. Because you remember New York at the time was undergoing a kind of revitalization of tourism because it was such a shithole in the 80s.
Yeah, it was.
And so it kind of builds on the identity of New York, that film, to some extent, to play a character in itself. And so the Call has this thing where you've got your villain and your good guys both coming from the same place in terms of dealing with real ghosts and technology, but one wants to use it for good and one wants to use it for evil. So you've got this kind of thing going on there. You can't say that for Frozen Empire because it seems like the Frozen Empire thing doesn't come into it until the third act, and it thematically doesn't resonate with the plots of all the other characters. And so it kind of feels like the Phoebe thing with Melody is fine in of itself, but it feels like that's that film. The film that you're telling there is the story of Phoebe and Melody. Yeah. It's a small story, maybe best suited for a TV show episode, an hour long on Netflix kind of thing.
Well, that's the funny thing, isn't it? Because people, who are frustrated with the film, said it would have been best served as a TV show. This instead of Sony investing 100 million into a new movie, they could have created a Ghostbusters TV show consisting of 6 episodes, 8 episodes, and broken up these kind of storylines, filled them out to 1 hour each, and then done a great kind of series, or have the entire series built around this orb that all builds up to the very last episode where he pops up at the fire station. You know what I mean? So it's kind of they could have.
What's the old Buffy template? It would just be the old Buffy template, perfectly great, valid template where you got your monster of the week, and every now and then you get a thematically cohesive story which links the whole arc of the series together. And then you got your big bag at the end, and at least then you can go into more detail and pay off smaller character traits. I've said this for years that Ghostbusters probably works better now in that format. It would probably be better as a animated series or a TV series. But I think the problem is Netflix, not Netflix, is Sony, because they aren't Netflix or Disney.
Well, that's the kind of thing, the pros and cons of Sony. The pros is, one, they make a movie, put it in cinema, release it on physical media, and then put it on streaming. Which is what the big, all the defenders of physical media, including myself, like that structure, right? But again, it makes it difficult for them to pursue a TV show. Let's say produce it and finance it and then sell it off to Netflix, Amazon Prime, whatever, unless they do some sort of deal. But yeah, I think that's kind of best served.
But I do want to say this right now, because I enjoyed Frozen Empire, warts and all. I quite enjoyed it. I liked hanging out with those characters in that world. As flawed as it is, I was happy with that experience. What I will say is I don't like it, and this goes for all sorts of genre fans like Star Wars, Trek, it's all the same. But when they say, ignore the critics, this is made by fans for fans. And whether they believe that or not, that's not what Sony ever want, because that's not how you make money. Because Ghostbusters fans in particular do not have the reach of a Star Wars fan. If a Star Wars film opens big, and even that's underwhelming, then at least it's going to make more money than a Ghostbusters film ever will, because just the swell of people's understanding and love of Star Wars and how it's just become the Christianity of pop culture, where it's everywhere now. It's just everywhere. Ghostbusters doesn't have that same huge fan base, that worldwide well-known fan base. It doesn't have its celebration, thing every year. And so to think that the fans alone will carry this franchise through as long as the fans get what they want seems like the worst possible way you can look at a franchise full stop.
Well, if you think about it, Afterlife didn't make a huge amount of money. You know, it must have done well for Sony on like streaming and home video for it to, you know, to think, okay, look, we can invest in a sequel because he made 204 million. Okay, it came out during COVID, right? But it wasn't.
But that was why
hit.
It was impressive. No, but that's why it was impressive, because it came off the back of no one going to the cinema. And so this was seen as a minor success because people went to the cinema to see it. The thing is that the first Ghostbusters film, and I know inflation adjusted, all this kind of thing, was only like 35 million, I think, to make. I don't know what that translates into now.
I'd probably, close to 100 probably.
Which is, you know, still a lot of money for the day, obviously. Answer the Call was, I think, 120 million to make and made whatever it made. All I do know is that Afterlife was a better success because they made basically the same amount of money worldwide, give or take a couple of mil.
Yeah, it costs less.
But because Afterlife cost so much less, like it was like 80 million, I think, to make that,
something around
the returns were going to be better. Now, the budget for this could not have been 80 million. It had to have been north of 100.
It's 100 million, I think they stated, yeah.
So if it performs the same as Afterlife, that's not going to be enough for Sony to maybe warrant another one.
Let's say you could do another film. You know, what do you think? Where do you think they should go with the franchise now? Do you think they should reboot, or do you think they should just basically focus on the new characters and drop the legacy ones?
You know what? It's tricky because I think that's the problem the franchise has built for itself now. It's saying, here's the new thing we're proposing for you to take this forward, but we've also got the old guard in our back pocket to make you remember what you liked in the first place. If we take out the old guard, is there enough in the cast of Afterlife to keep it afloat elsewhere? Maybe. It's tricky to say because I don't think Frozen Empire does anything with the characters that they didn't go through in the Afterlife film. I would say a lot of their arcs are the same, effectively. Phoebe, you know, misunderstood problem child, told she can't do something, fights against the system, does it, finds her place in the world. Yeah, that happened in Afterlife as well. And while I like the idea of her being benched in this and finding another role for her, I think that storyline doesn't do her much good.
Well, it doesn't do her much. It just basically handicaps her till the very end, till she gets to do what she can do, and just basically saves the day by just resolving the issue within 10 minutes. You know,
well, I mean,
the problem with I don't like characters who can do everything. You know what I mean? They've got to be flawed.
I would disagree with you on that. I would say she doesn't do anything in this film other than, for some reason, do the dumbest thing imaginable, which is come out of their body for a bit. Just so, you know, and it's kind of like, I get that, and that would maybe work in an episode of the show. But it's such a weird tonal kind of mismatch to what they're doing. They're saying, here's an 84 film in its vibe and tone, and here's what we remember. But this particular plot strand is much more young adult, Twilight, Hunger Games-y, kind of angsty, teenage relationship stuff. Yeah. I'm not saying that isn't right for a Ghostbusters film, but I do think you have to adjust the tone of one to make the other one feel less incongruous.
Well, yeah, I mean, I just don't like the idea of kids or teenagers being Ghostbusters. I think it's an adult thing. I don't like the idea of film studios think this always works. Why they make let's make it appealing to children. Let's put kids or teenagers in it, and they can basically pretend they're them. But majority of the time, all of us as kids, we always pretended we wanted to be the hero, the grown-up man or woman, whatever, in the film, right? So this is the kind of flaw with it, and it kind of undermines the movie. It makes it kind of juvenile in a certain way because you're trying to entertain an adult. Really, you're appealing to adults with nostalgia, and they're going in and watching kids be Ghostbusters. I'm like, I don't want to see that. Really, that's what I don't want. I don't want to pay to see that. You know,
I kind of agree, but at the same time, personally speaking, I also don't want to see Dan Aykroyd, Bill Murray, Annie Potts, Ernie Hudson be Ghostbusters because it's nice to see, and there are charming moments, but there's a certain amount of you're too old for this, and it's a little bit embarrassing.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's such a hard thing for my brain to process because my Ghostbusters fan nerd brain is going, there's Dan Aykroyd and they're shooting laser guns again. And then the other part of my brain is like, no, it doesn't look right. There's something kind of sad about this. Well, I'm charmed by it. It's such a it's such a head fuck. It really is.
Yeah, the nostalgia's getting to you, you know. But they've got actors in this who are perfect, you know, for Ghostbusters. Paul Rudd, put James Acaster as a proper Ghostbuster, you know, because he because his sense of comedy and timing fits right in that world, the dry sense of comedy. I mean, even some people may disagree, but I think Camille, as Nadim, I think he could be a great Ghostbuster, but he's written not to be one, and he can't be.
Well, he's Lewis Tully, isn't he? Basically,
well, kind of, yeah, because it's when I was watching it, he's kind of like the keymaster and a gatekeeper, but there's nothing. They don't connect. He's just there as the opposite to defeat it.
He is the Janosch Lewis Tully kind of character in the film, the kind of guy who's brought into the world via some kind of weird obtuse angle and is dropped in at the deep end. And one way or the other fishes their way through. But what I liked about his character was that he was like the what's the word I'm looking for? It's like he was just shocked by what was going on around him constantly. And even when he is like there to save the day kind of thing, he is still flummoxed by this reality happening around him, and that's where the humor comes from. It's almost an inverse of Lewis, where Louis almost rolls with the punches, but that comedy of him becoming a devil dog and having an agenda is really fascinating for his character.
I wouldn't want to drop the legacy characters entirely, but you could have Ray or Winston pop up to sort of give advice or whatever. But because Bill Murray, there's no point having Bill Murray because he doesn't have anything to do in this film other than the fact that he does sort of do his little trick with Nadim. Testing his if he's like possessed or what powers he has, which is kind of amusing, but it's kind of that's the only capacity that he can kind of use Venkman.
And that scene's so short that the comedy doesn't really build in that.
It's all cut
naturally.
I think, really.
It's like it's effectively the same scene as the electric shock scene from the first Ghostbusters film, but that breathes. That scene really does have. And in fact, what's interesting about that scene is there's almost tension to it as well, like this weird nervous tension. How Peter behaves, and you kind of want that for this scene, but that pacing of it, it's like it's so wound as tight as it can before it unsprings that the scene's over before you can even really enjoy it. A lot of my Ghostbusters friends who are fans have been saying this is the film we've wanted for 30 years. This is a real yeah. This is the best Ghostbusters we've had since this. It's perfect. Blah 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 blah. And I'm not going to comment on how they viewed the film. That's for them, and that's absolutely fine.
Yeah.
For me, it was more successful when it was dropping new ideas and characters into the mix.
That's the point I want to mention, actually, because you'd said, what I agree with, I think, before we even recorded this, was that it does a pretty good job at world building with the new tech, which I kind of enjoyed seeing how these things work and how they're sort of moving to build, a new containment unit, things like that. So Winston's been developing all these new ideas, and that's great. And that's kind of like, okay, let's go beyond what is just a proton pack and a trap.
Yeah, and I think that's what I really liked about it. I liked the levels of invention they did manage to squeeze in. It's one of these frustrating things where, again, you go, but can I have more of that? If you get rid of less of that plot line, or if what are you missing out by the fact that too much is going on at once? Garaka, or whatever the villain's called, that hasn't sunk into my brain yet, finally appears after Phoebe comes out of her body, so they could use her voice chant to bring him back out of the orb. Which I don't understand.
Lucky turns up out of the blue.
We've not been told where she was at any point beforehand, or
also, which really puzzled me. Me and my girlfriend were like, Where did Ray come into this? When they go into... Winston shows them the new facility, the Spengler family, and then Ray just turns up, wearing shades. I was like, where did he come from?
That feels like a running joke, because Bill Murray just turns up towards the end of the film, and then the next scene he's got shades on. And I was like, where did he put those shades on? And why would he do it when it's nighttime and freezing cold, dark firehouse? I don't know what was going on there. But yeah... Again, it just feels like there's a scene missing here. There's a line of dialogue missing there. There's an establishing shot not used properly there. Yeah. Everything has been trimmed to get as much of that script on the screen as possible. And I kind of commend it, but at the same time, it's just a frustrating watch. You kind of go, I want that scene to live a little longer because... I need to say this because I've been trying to get this in for ages. I think the reason why I like this film so much, more than anything else, it's because I think secretly the hero of the film is Ray Stantz. I think it's a Dan Aykroyd film.
It is. I think so, because he tags along for the entire film pretty much, which I was really happy with.
All the way through. I thought it was going to be like the old film where he turns up to repeat the lines he did from the first Ghostbusters and then sit down for a breather. But no, he figures out the orb, he's involved in exploring it, he gets it to the lab, he takes it to the library. He's the guy who's realised he can turn the whole of the firehouse into a massive trap. to bring the ghost down. You know, he's the guy who comes up with it. Phoebe doesn't do that. She just has a conversation with a ghost who sets fire to herself at the end. You know, it's that weird... It's that weird thing where I think generally the hero of the film is Ray Stantz, and for that alone, it's my favourite film of 2024. So, it's just for me. I've always said this is Dan Aykroyd's baby, right? His family are obsessed with the supernatural. Ghostbusters comes from his love of, you know, old horror and also Bob Hope comedy films of the 50s and 60s. It's the SNL version of The Road to or Ghost Chasers and things like that, or The Old Dark House. And that's what the films have lost, that element. But the biggest complaint I had about Afterlife was it felt like all of a sudden this wasn't an Aykroyd world anymore. It was a Reitman family heirloom to pass on to their family to keep the IP alive. My love of it has always been because of Dan Aykroyd's eccentricities and what he brought to that world. And so to see that in Frozen Empire felt like, okay, this now feels like a Ghostbusters film because Dan Aykroyd's front and centre.
As we mentioned earlier, the Ghostbusters problem is that it's still relying on, you know, these kind of the tropes of Ghostbusters and to please the fans by having things there. Not really explained in a way for it to be a natural kind of thing or a good way to introduce something. It's very much just like, do you remember that? Do you remember that? It's the member berries thing, which I think you'd even argued with Afterlife. And Mark Kermode, I think, you know, again with his review of Frozen Empire called Afterlife nostalgia porn. But hey, you know, at least this one did reference Ghostbusters 2.
And this is my Ghostbusters nerd hat coming out. Maybe a greater nerd than me can correct me. But like in Afterlife, they make this big thing of saying every couple of years there's this big cataclysmic supernatural event. And the 84 film was one of them. And now in 2021, it's happening again. And I'm thinking, don't you want to count 89 in that? Because 89 was a pretty big supernatural cataclysmic event that affected, you know, all of New York and similar stakes. But no, you ignore that until this film, when all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, 89 still happened in the Statue of Liberty thing, and look, there's a slime blower in the background. And I was like, that's nice, but it felt like you ignored Ghostbusters 2.
Well, it's that kind of thing now, isn't it? That soft reboot where they kind of forget about all sequels and just focus on the first movie.
Yeah, but then...
You know?
Because it implies in Afterlife that maybe the events of Ghostbusters 2 didn't happen, because it implies that they broke up not too long after the Marshmallow Man attack and everyone thought it was a big hallucination, so people forgot about it.
Yeah.
But yet now they're saying that it did happen, but they don't mention Ecto 1A not being a thing that exists. They still have the original Ecto 1. It's just, whatever nostalgia fits the purpose of that plot, I think, works for them.
That's what should have been in Frozen Empire, was the Ecto A car.
I would have loved to see Ecto 1A.
Yeah, it's got all the crap on top of it, extra crap. That's what you need, and hazard tape thrown on it. You know?
What bugged me was that they were going, here's the new Ecto Z van, and I was like, oh, what is it? And it was just a Mercedes-Benz black van with the logo on the side. I was like,
it's so rubbish.
Ultimately, if they mention Ghostbusters 2 as canon or not, or this, that, and the other as canon or not, it doesn't matter. What I think I miss from the franchise at this point is that, like I said before, that workplace comedy vibe that just happens to be about the supernatural.
But what they all was kind of missing is that the 84 film had this kind of gritty documentary type of filming. It was like very straight. It was mucky. It was like a very straightforward comedy, which had this high quality visual effects thrown in. But it had this, the camera would just be like on a tripod and just film those guys in a sort of static shot. Where, like, you know, the bit where they're trying to get in the elevator into the hotel, talk to the guy, because I'll get the next one, you know. And it's that very, it's not intercutting at all. It's just very straightforward comedy. And I think it's kind of missing a lot of that. And I think you just need to analyse how Reitman did that and just kind of, you know, copy it.
Well, this is, you know, like, I say this in my book.
I think in my head, it's not that difficult. I don't know what they're doing wrong.
But I say this in my book, but it's like Reitman. He is a functional director who's a brilliant comedy producer, and he knows how to get the best out of his acts and stars. But Ghostbusters was the exception that proves the rule, because I think most of his films are quite flat sitcom-y looking, and I think we've spoken about this before.
Yeah.
But Ghostbusters, for whatever reason, has this texture to it. It manages to be gothic horror, but also modern New York, and melds it perfectly. And every frame is built on that kind of Citizen Kane-esque pyramid of actors in a scene. You know, everything is always kind of something in the center and two things off to the side. The lift, the adverts, the library scene, catching Slimer. There's a very traditional look to that film, which is beautifully classically framed, but it's got depth. Every scene's got depth and layers and shadows to it. Ghostbusters 2, by comparison, is almost like a sitcom way.
It is like all the interior is a TV movie. It's really flat. Yeah. It's like when you go watch this film he did the same year, Twins. It looks identical with its photography.
It's that alchemy. I know we say it a lot with this film, but like the lightning in a bottle thing, it does feel like everyone hit their marks perfectly for this. And Frozen Empire, if you're too busy leaning on the iconography of something else, what you're effectively doing at the end of the day is saying, this isn't my vision. This is your vision. This is the fans' vision, and I'm here to please you. Yeah. But like, you know, for what you want to say about Paul, I've always say this. Everyone knows I love Answer the Call. I know people despise it. We'll not get into that discussion. But one of the things I think I love about it is that it is Kate Dippold and Paul Feig's vision of that world. It's what they would do with the franchise. And if you don't like it, at least it fails on its own terms. Afterlife fails on Ivan Reitman's terms, but gets by because it's leaning on that nostalgia. This, I definitely think, is Gil's version of Ghostbusters.
Yes.
But it's less successful when he leans into the 84 iconography. I reached out when I found out they were filming in the UK, and I was really surprised. And I just went, oh, what's going on? Are you looking for extras? And they went, no, we're only handing this out to Ghostbuster groups. So, you know, like there's Ghostbusters Wales and there's Ghostbusters London or Ghostbusters Brighton, like 7 or 8, and they have their own charity fundraising teams. They dress up and they raise money. They were sent invites. And I'm a lonely dude who has a Ghost Corps cadet badge on his wall. So I'm a lonely soldier. Also, I will be honest, I don't know if I would have wanted to anyway if they'd asked, just because I like the separation of not being involved in it. Do you know what I mean?
That's a fair argument. But if someone said to me, Ollie, do you want to be able to have a cameo in a Superman film? I'd be like, yeah, I'll do it.
But if I saw myself in a Ghostbusters film, and not that I think this is a god-awful, awful film, but it was dog shit, and I was in it, I'd be like, that's my fault. I've ruined this film.
I've ruined Ghostbusters for my 2-second cameo, you know.
I just like having that slight arm's distance from that thing I love. When James Acaster was cast, I was fucking furious, because I started out doing stand-up the same time as him, and I gave up, and then blah, 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 and I don't begrudge him in it, and I'm not jealous, really, but I did think, I wish I'd stuck with my career better, or, you know what I mean, or done so, because that could have been me. I honestly really like James Acaster in this film. Again, I'd like to see more of him.
I love how he's got this, it made everyone laugh in the cinema. It's like a haunted Spin Doctor CD. I thought that was great. That was really funny.
See, it's all that stuff that I love.
That's what you want, more of that type of comedy in the film, you know, and that's the thing that kind of makes Ghostbusters work. Ghostbusters, you're really just there for the laughs, and the ghost busting is secondary for me.
It is, but that's not how you sell a film now, because you're selling a film on the iconography more than anything else, right? It's why I always get bored every time a new Ghostbusters comes out, which is a shocking thing to say considering from 89 till 2016 we had nothing. But it's always the same merchandise. It's the No Ghost logo, it's the Marshmallow Man, it's now the Mini Puffs, it's the Slimer.
Well, at least we didn't get Walmart shoved down our throats in this one.
Yeah,
you know, that was really bad, like corporate, like, you know, product placement.
Afterlife should not spend most of its running time saying this is the middle of nowhere, you know, town Americana kind of shithole. But it has a Walmart just outside.
Oh yeah, because the Walmart's made it a shithole. That's why.
Yeah,
Walmart's
maybe
destroyed all the businesses. You know, that's what it's there for. That should have been kind of the joke.
I think the franchise either has to do the TV thing and tell smaller, more unique stories they can take a risk on. And it needs to break its structure. It needs to stop saving its villain for the third act and either introduce it earlier so you can work more on the comedy and the characters. Like, in my head, I could imagine an episode of the show where Phoebe gets trapped in the firehouse and all the other Ghostbusters are on the outside. They can't get in for some reason. So you have to use her wits to survive, like a Die Hard almost, with ghosts in the firehouse. And they're on the outside trying to help. But that's not what you're going to want from a movie. But to me, that'd be a great episode of a Ghostbusters TV show.
Yeah. I mean, this movie forgets that Ghostbusters has horror elements, and it really screws up. There's no jump scares at all. There's nothing in it.
No, the only one they have is the library ghost.
Yeah, but that's poorly done as well.
Oh, yeah, no, it is.
It's not even like, it's just like you could have done something where he looks just and sees the ghost. She goes, tells him to shush. Then he looks back again. It charges at him, but it should have been gone. And then he turns around. It's right next to him.
Something like that, or just have the
simple.
joke be it whispers shh as he runs past, as if to say,
And he's like, "Oh, sorry," and then goes on.
Exactly.
It lacked a certain level of creepiness, didn't it?
Yeah, and I think that's the point, isn't it? Because like a good Abbott and Costello movie, when he did Meets Frankenstein or whatever House of Dracula film, it was like the comedy was daft, but the horror was always a genuine threat. And when you cartoonerize your villains, then you're instantly taking away the threat. So your comedy or your character work has to be better. Because what I don't want is another Ghostbusters film of a similar structure that riffs on Vigo or riffs on something else we've seen or does a callback. It's like, you can move away from the callbacks now.
One thing I need before we finish up is like, this film should have started with the Ghostbusters theme, and it doesn't. Like Afterlife, you need to...
Don't even get me started on that. It's been an annoyance for years.
As soon as that logo came up, it should have gone Ghostbusters. It doesn't do it. It's like, what are you doing?
Are they ashamed of it or something? Because that's every single Ghostbusters film since Ghostbusters 2 has got their intro wrong. They have a really cool cold open. Like Answer the Call has a really cool cold open, I think, with the ghost and the thing and the cemetery and the staircase collapsing, and you zoom into his face and it cuts to Ghostbusters and the theme, but not the logo. And I'm like, oh, you dropped it. And then Afterlife does the same thing where it just cuts after, Egon dies to the logo and this epic Bernstein-esque theme. And then this one does the logo perfectly from the 84 film after the big shocking beginning and then doesn't do the theme tune. And I'm like, but that's like having a gun barrel at the beginning of Bond, but not playing the Bond theme at the same time. It's like, why would you do that? That's the point. That's why you have it in there. These films, the last three, have been almost right. It's like swing and a miss. It's like they put a lot of effort into swinging that punch. Yeah. Because you see Adam Savage talking to the people who make these films on his channel, Tested.
Yeah, I saw those, yeah.
And they're raving about the practical effects and the puppetry and the love and the craft and the joy and how much they love the 84 film. And then you see the film and it's like, it's just lost in the product of the manufacturing of making a movie.
Yeah.
Because the editing gets in the way, or the music, or the tone, or the script can't buoy everything up. I want people to go away from this discussion we're having by saying it's kind of like a near but yet so far kind of film. I love it, and I can not love it. I enjoyed it, and I will happily sit through it again. Mostly,
well, you've seen it twice now, haven't you? So...
I have, yeah. And it was fun to watch it with an audience, because when I watched Afterlife, it was a press screening and it was deathly silent all the way through. But with this, there was, a nice vibe and stuff. And the film warms up, and I think that the audience warmed to it as it goes along. Yeah. There was more laughter at the back end than the front end. But again, you kind of want your comedy at the front end, It's a slight recommendation, but it's one of those on in the background if you're not really invested. And if you're a Ghostbusters fan, you're going to love it and you're going to want to watch it. Yeah. But everyone else, I can't imagine what the appeal is going to be. And that's kind of what the problem is with the franchise now.
Don't go in expecting too much, but there is stuff there to enjoy. There's the humour works for me, and that's what kind of gives it a pass. But then humour is subjective, so...
Of course. Of course it is. I mean, I'm sure there's loads of people who don't think Ghostbusters is funny at all. I get that. It's just, I don't know, end of the day, what the franchise needs to do, if it can do this, is it needs a fresh lick of paint. We've done the homaging to 84. If it can't get out of the way of that film, it's forever going to be stuck in this member berries loop that, for all the goodwill in the world with new characters and new plots, if they're fighting against a wave of that nostalgia, or that nostalgia bait, or member bait, whatever you want to call it, then you can't grow that universe. You just simply can't. And I think the best way they can do it is to move it into a different format, TV, see how it goes. But that's where you'll get your better stories, the characters, world building. You can probably do it there better in a 10-hour series than a 2-hour movie. But who knows? Who knows what happens next? It's weird being a Ghostbusters fan. I don't recommend it.
I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to click the like button and hit the bell to be notified of my latest reviews. Big thanks to my patrons and YouTube members for supporting the channel. If you want to get involved and gain access to exclusive videos and take part in Q&As, follow the link below.